Okay. Hey, everybody. This is Max Shank here, and I am with James Clear today. He can be found at jamesclear.com. He has a really good email newsletter, and he also wrote an awesome book called Atomic Habits that has just taken off in a really big way. I thought the most important thing we could do here today is really just talk about habits as much as possible. And the reason I'm so excited to talk with you is because that's like the foundation that everything else basically rests on. You know, you can have the technical skill to do anything, but if you don't get up off your ass to do it, then it's absolutely invalid. It's worthless. So there has to be a foundation of like getting shit done. And you have really dedicated a ton of time and attention to figuring out the simplest way to explain that to people. So A, thank you very much for your contribution. And B, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. And I think you're right. Like there are probably a few major pillars that impact our outcomes in life. Certainly, luck and randomness play some kind of role. Your decisions, there can be single decisions that make a big impact: what career to pursue, what city to live in, things like that, who to marry. But then there are your habits and your repeated choices. And luck, by definition, is not under your control. So I think the only reasonable approach is to focus on what you can control. Decisions are only made occasionally, especially big ones like what city to live in or what career to pursue. So really the majority of your time, 95% of your days, 99% of your days are going to be spent with habits. And whether habits serve you or hinder you is going to have a huge outcome on what those returns and results look like in the long run. I think I like to summarize it by saying you could look at most domains in life and say that your outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits. Like your financial results, your bank account is a lagging measure of your financial habits. Your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning and reading habits. Your physical fitness is a lagging measure of your nutrition and training habits. Even the amount of clutter in your bedroom or on your desk is a lagging measure of your cleaning habits. So much of life is a result of that. It's like whatever point you're at right now, whether you like it or hate it, whether you are happy with the trajectory you are on or want it to change, whatever that point is at this particular moment, it's often the sum of your previous habits that got you there.
Yeah. And I think something you said that I've never really thought of was that it's a lagging measure. Like there's a time delay. And I think people occasionally find it frustrating that they don't just instantly build some muscles as soon as they start doing an exercise.
Yeah. This is one of the challenges, especially with fitness, is that for some reason we live in a very outcome results oriented society. Things only become a story when they become a result. Like you only hear about the Broadway play once it's a hit, or you hear about the book once it's a bestseller. You're never going to see a news story that is like, man eats chicken and salad for lunch today. It's only a story once man loses 100 pounds, And so the process and the system, the daily habits are often hidden from view, and the results are highly visible. And you see this like highlight reel on social media or on the news or wherever. And I think because we see results so much, we tend to overvalue them. There's this great quote that the San Antonio Spurs NBA basketball team have in their locker room. So they've won 5 championships. And the quote says something like, "When I feel like giving up, I think about the stone cutter who takes his hammer and bangs on the stone 100 times without it showing a crack. And then on the 101st swing, it splits in two. And I know that it wasn't the 101st that did it, but all the 100 that came before." And I think that idea, that's habits in a nutshell. It applies to so many things. Like, it's not the latest workout that gives you a fit body. It's all the ones that came before. It's not the last sentence that writes the book. It's all the ones that came before. And the reason why showing up and building habits is so important is because it's only through that accumulated body of putting in the reps and building up the volume that you ever get to the result in the first place. But we only hear about the results, so we tend to overvalue and overfocus there.
And it compounds either way, right? Up or down. It's going to be compounding the whole way through.
This is kind of the dangerous part about habits. They can either they're like a double-edged sword. They can either cut you down or build you up.
You spiral up or you spiral down. Yeah,
for sure.
Either way, no doubt about that. It's interesting to consider the precursor to all this, which is deciding what to aim for. You know, how do you picture that? We were talking a little bit before we hit the recording, and you know, how do you? I always tell people to be careful of borrowed goals. You know,
I like that idea of a borrowed goal. That happens a lot, right? We like imitate the desires or needs or you know, what society tells us we should do.
Right, and it's way more comfortable to get something that has like more or less a guaranteed result. Like if I do this thing, people seem to like this thing. It's like, you know, let me get this Ferrari because it seems like pretty girls like Ferraris, or let me get these big muscles because it seems like they like those too.
Let me go to law school or med school because nobody ever gets criticized for wanting to be a lawyer or a doctor. You know?
Right, exactly. That's a safe play. People will respect me. They'll love me. I'll get attention. So, you know, and that is actually the biggest distinction that I've really come across, is the distinction between acting so that you will get attention versus giving attention to a task. So the difference is if you give your full attention to the task and forget about yourself, then you can get in that coveted flow state. And if you focus only on getting attention, then you're automatically setting yourself up for disappointment somewhere down the road, because eventually you're like, oh yeah, people really like me. And then like, oh, well, I'm not The Rock though. I'm not Dwayne Johnson. That guy's a lot stronger and people love him way more. So now I'm still trying to get more attention, focus on getting attention. But you never get that bliss that you get from giving your attention to something. And whether it's like woodworking or running or trail running or cooking or whatever it is, like if you can give your attention to something, that makes you feel powerful, that makes you feel at peace. And if you're just focusing on the attention that you'll get, you can pretty much bet that your goal is shit. And it's probably something that you borrowed from someone else.
That's a great distinction between giving and getting. It makes me think a little bit. So I have a concept in the book where I make this distinction between outcome-based habits and identity-based habits. And outcome-based habits they're organized around, we start with the result that we want. So, you know, I want to get 6-pack abs, or I want to lose 100 pounds, or I want to double my income this year. And like, all those things are fine. But if you make it about the outcome, you can sort of imagine behavior change like the layers of an onion. So the outermost layer of the onion is like the result that you want, losing 100 pounds or making more money. Then the next layer in is the plan that you're going to follow to get that result. So I need to go to the gym 4 days a week, or I need to make 20 sales calls a day or something like that. And the implicit assumption, that's usually where people stop. We set a goal and then we develop a plan for achieving the goal. And the implicit assumption is that if I do this, then I'll be the type of person I want to be. But there's a deeper layer, right? There's like identity inside of there. And so if instead we invert it and rather than starting with the result, let's start with the identity. Let's ask ourselves, who is the type of person I want to become? Who is the type of person that could achieve the things that I want? And focus on building an identity. And then you come up with a plan of habits that reinforce that identity. And then you let the results come naturally rather than your self-worth or your internal judgment. That I think is a more powerful place to approach it from. And it's kind of similar to the distinction you're making here about getting attention versus giving attention. Getting attention is like getting results. I want more results. And if I get more results, if I get more attention, then I'll be the person I want to be. But giving attention, that's more about like, who is the type of person I want to be? Where do I want to allocate my time to? Who do I want to show up as each day? And if I do that, then all these good things happen naturally. And so I think there's a lot of power in inverting that typical approach to habits and saying, rather than trying to be the type of person who loses 30 pounds in 6 months, I'm going to be the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. I'm going to focus on building an identity that reinforces that and being that person.
So in this case, you're starting with who.
Yes. Start with who rather than what. Right.
Yeah.
The how can actually be quite similar. The how is I'm going to the gym either way. But by focusing on who you want to be, you're reinforcing that desired identity. It's like, you can sort of view habits as, it's like every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. And so like each time you show up and do that habit, you're casting a vote for being a certain type of person or reinforcing a certain type of identity. It's like your habits are how you embody a particular identity. Every time that you sit down and play the guitar for 3 minutes, you embody the identity of a musician. Every time you meditate for 30 seconds, you embody the identity of a meditator. And it's not just with labels like that, being a musician or a runner or a writer or whatever, but also just with the general internal narrative that you tell yourself. Every time you make your bed, you embody the identity of someone who's clean and organized. Every time you do one push-up, you embody the identity of someone who doesn't miss workouts.
Oh yeah. Once you get started, you can definitely experience like a little bit of momentum and that compounding, right? So you get some momentum once you get started with that whole process.
Sure. So anyway, I think that's the ultimate reason habits matter. It's not just that they like give you external results. You know, like we often talk about habits like, yeah, they can be the method to making more money and getting abs and all that stuff. But the real reason they matter is they reinforce that desired identity.
Well, I think, so one of my favorite quotes is by the wrestler Dan Gable, "If it's important, do it every day." And if something's important, it usually gets done. And if something's not important, people usually find some reason to explain why it was not done. But like you said, you know, starting with who is like, I would recommend people take like a full day and figure out like what their values are in order. Like what's their actual priority? You know, I'm sure you know that there's no plural for priority actually, because it means number one most important thing. So the word priorities is this like total insanity that it means nothing. It's like multiple first most important things.
Yeah.
It's like ridiculous.
Like asking people, what are your ones on your to-do list? Like it doesn't even really make sense. It's like, no, there's a one and then there's two. Like it's not.
Well, and you have to prioritize. Like it's uncomfortable, but you have to prioritize. So you say, this is most important to me. And then you take that day and you figure out, well, like, why do I think this is good? Like, why do I think being a firefighter is a good idea, for example? Or why do I think it's good to do art? Like, why do I care about like being that person? Like, what do I really get from it? And, you know, that's why I think if you are willing to do something and get none of the credit, it's probably a clue that you're doing the right thing. And then you just hammer at that main thing as if you'd be happy as long as the result was achieved, regardless of whether or not like you get like all the fame and fortune that everyone tells you will finally allow you to be happy, right?
If you do it, even if you wouldn't get the credit.
Bingo. That's my litmus test, because I mean, listen, the reality is like I got to the point where I don't have to do things that aren't fun. So like, why would I? Because to a certain point, there's like no reason to sacrifice even a little bit of happiness for more dollars.
Right.
Like it makes no sense. So if you get to that point, you can decide for yourself what's really important. And if you can take your ego out of the equation, which is one of the absolute hardest things to do, then it means that you really believe in those habits that we're talking about. Like you really believe those behaviors are important for yourself to do every day, for other people. Obviously you want to let people just do their own thing. But if you have an idea like you and I do about how people can improve in a way that is simple and easy, then we will. You know, there's that great quote. What was it? It was either write something worth reading or do something worth being written about.
I think it's actually a Ben Franklin quote. Every quote gets attributed to him or Mark Twain, but I think that actually is a Franklin quote.
Yeah, it's either Franklin or one of the Roosevelts actually.
But it's like write something worth reading or do something worth writing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you believe in something that much, you're very likely to really give it all of your attention. Otherwise, you're going to sort of like maybe force yourself to do something that you feel like you need to do because of something that you need to have. Like I need to have a 6-pack, so I need to run on the treadmill for an hour every day and I can't eat a carb. but that
That's a very
probably
different way of approaching the problem of behavior change. If you're coming at it from that sense of almost guilt or shame,
totally.
it's like you're pushing yourself into it rather than being pulled into it naturally. And I think that I have a little mindset reframe like that I think about occasionally, which is, you could say like, I have to pick my kids up from school and I have to go to work today and I have to finish this report and I have to go to the gym. Or you could say, I get to pick my kids up from school and I get to go to work today and I get to finish this report and I get to go to the gym. And the difference between have to and get to is only one word, but it's a really, really large gap.
The difference between got to and get to is only one letter, but it's massive, right? I mean, it's everything. And, the best example, it's funny, like we have all these examples from other stories we've heard, but like Viktor Frankl realizing that the only thing he truly has control over is how he can react and respond in any situation. Even if everything is outside your control, like his sphere of control was barely inside of his own skin. He had like no extra control radius, right? So if you think about it from that perspective, it really clarifies what you can actually do. So you can actually control your attitude and you can actually decide what you're going to do. And, I'm sure we can agree that if you can basically engage the clutch early in the day, then you can sort of take control a lot more effectively. And that's
there's definitely a power to knocking down like the lead domino, right? And you like let that momentum carry you through to the rest of a positive day. I kind of have, I have this moment. Sometimes I refer to them as like forks in the road or like a decisive moment. So
right.
like, it's like 9 a.m. say, and I'll sit down on my computer and either I open up Evernote and I start writing the next article I'm going to work on, or I go to ESPN and I check the latest sports news. And like, what
That's
happens
your
in the
first
next
thing in the
hour?
morning.
Right? That's basically what happens when I get into my office. So either that next hour is productive because I started writing, or it's a total waste. And it really is the first like 45 seconds that determines whether that time is spent productively or not. Because if I get into writing, it only has to be a sentence or two, but I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm into the work, and then it's on.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's worthwhile actually to ask yourself, what are some of those forks in the road throughout your day? What are some of those decisive moments? And if you just organize your discipline and willpower, but also environment and your schedule around getting those few choices right, getting those lead dominoes right, the next hour kind of falls into place naturally. And so there really isn't that much to change. It's maybe just like 5 or 6 key little choices that get you moving in the right path.
Well, and that's why I always joke that fitness ain't that complicated, because I have all the stuff that I want to do in the morning before I click open the technology. And like you said, I have a fork in the road, and like, who knows, maybe I'm going to be learning about astronomy for 2 hours because I'm really interested in like what they're talking about with black holes and dark matter. Or I'll get into productivity mode. But before that, I have, to honor myself in the morning and protect the vessel, to have at least a time where I just focus on self-love and self-care. And that's what I do first thing. First thing I do in the morning is I do a little breathing exercise, bridge the gap between the conscious and the subconscious, and basically reassume control of the wheel, basically. While you're asleep, like the night guy is doing his thing.
The process of continuing to wake up, you like decide to take over the reins.
Yeah, like I'm sort of, I'm taking charge again. And so you can fit like all of the good stuff that you already know works for you on one index card, for sure. You shorthand it. Like I have it's 12. I have 18 things, one word each. And if I get like 5 of them, I'm like guaranteed to have an amazing day. Like it really doesn't take that much. I mean, one of them is to like practice the breathing exercise. One of them is to roll around on the floor, because it's just so good for you to be able to maneuver yourself at the several stages, like climbing on something, running around on the ground on your feet, wrestling around, and then also just on the floor. It's amazing how many people can't roll over. And it's also like the world's biggest foam roller. So you get this desensitization to pressure And that really helps with a lot of people who have physical pain, because the reason they have pain is that their barometer is just really off. Mm. Like their pressure sensor is like so sensitive. It's like, ouch, ouch, that really hurts. It's like, no, you're just a little bit of a sissy right now. Like just roll around on the floor and you like eventually you won't be. But it's not complicated. It doesn't need to be a lot of things, and it doesn't need to be a lot of time. So how do you get people, and we're talking about like from your end of the spectrum there, like the identity side of things is like that foundation. Like, how do you decide what to do with that like magic time in the morning? And, you know, do you decide to have like an evening routine too? And finding that balance of how much automaticity that you want for each segment of your day, because I find that the stopwatch is like one of the most useful things for me, because if I set the timer, all kinds of different ways. I have a 5-minute countdown timer, because 5 minutes is just such like a weird number. It doesn't seem like a lot, but you can get so much accomplished. Give me the strongest guy ever, and he's probably not going to be able to do 5 minutes of push-ups. He's going to need several breaks, 5 minutes of squats, 5 minutes running. You can, if you're very fast, you can run a mile. If you're pretty damn slow, you can run a half a mile. Like you can still cover a lot of ground in 5 minutes. Same thing, practicing music, whatever. And then I have a count up timer just so I can see what my investment has been in something when I don't want that same sense of urgency. So the difference between counting up and counting down, I actually have a couple hourglasses, just so I can have at least a certain amount of time, but there's no like hard stop. And I think the ability to partition stuff out like that is really good, because everybody is a procrastinator by nature. Everybody is. The whole reason that human beings have survived so long is because they have found the most efficient way to continue surviving. And it doesn't make sense to waste any calories on something that like you just don't actually have to do.
Law of least action.
Law of least action. Exactly. We go right back to it. So then, you know, take that all into consideration. What do you need to do? What do you want to do? And what is not important? And then figure out how much of you want it, how much of your day you want to be like habit level automation, because that's the cool thing, is it really does build momentum, not even just within the micro level. So like your first 5 minutes is more difficult than your second 5 minutes. But the second day of doing 5 minutes is easier than the first day of doing 5 minutes. And the second week is even easier than that. And it just like that's what makes it such an attractive thing, because everybody's always doing their best to get the best result for themselves. Always, like by definition, who's trying to get like the worst result for themselves? But it's that pain in the beginning that people aren't, or that discomfort, I should say, in the beginning, or that lack of immediate results that gets people to kind of fall off the wagon, because they're not willing to wait for like the grand treasure that you have, 2, 5, and 10 years down the road from exercise. I mean,
I see this a lot with habits, that like you can imagine pretty much any behavior is producing multiple outcomes across time. So like we just simplify it and say there's an immediate outcome and an ultimate outcome. Well, people were like, well, if it's a bad habit, why would I do it? If it's so bad for me, like, why do I keep coming back to it? And the answer is most bad habits, the immediate outcome is actually pretty favorable. Like, what is the immediate outcome of eating a donut? It's great. It's sweet. It's sugary. It's enjoyable. It's only the ultimate outcome, if you keep eating donuts for a year or 2 years or whatever, that's unfavorable. Same thing with even like smoking a cigarette. The immediate outcome of smoking might be that you get to socialize with a friend outside of work, or you get to curb your nicotine craving, or you reduce stress and anxiety. But the ultimate outcome in 6 months or 2 years or 10 years is very negative. And so with good habits, though, it's often the reverse. The immediate outcome of going to the gym for 4 days isn't really a whole lot. Like if anything, your body's sore. You look the same in the mirror. The scale hasn't really changed. It's only if you keep going to the gym for 6 months or 2 years or 5 years that you end up with this great result that you were hoping for. And so there's kind of this like valley of death early on when you're doing a habit where, and you hear people say this a lot. They'll say like, I've been running for a month. Why can't I see a change in my body? Or I've been working on this book for 6 months, like, but it's still a mess and it's like an outline. I don't feel like I've made any progress.
Well, and it's like sign up for the gym in January, quit in February.
Right.
And it's all related.
As soon as they get to that point, they stop.
And it's all related to that ability to defer gratification into the future. And it's human beings are like one of the only animals that really does this at this level. Right. And if you're not able to defer gratification, you're not going to get as long-term a favorable result, because someone who's willing to defer gratification longer can be more patient and have a better plan that has a higher, as you said, ultimate outcome and a smaller immediate outcome.
And this is kind of where we come a little bit full circle to what we talked about previously with the idea of identity change and embodying identity and being a certain type of person, which is that the ideal immediate outcome is a reinforcement of your desired identity. So you're in the middle of doing a squat, and with each rep that you finish, it's a little vote that, hey, I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And I literally feel good. I'm getting the reward of being fit or being an athlete or being that kind of person I want to be in the middle of doing the very act that eventually pays off. And so, no, you still won't get the benefits of squatting for another 6 months or 2 years or however long it is to hit whatever goal you're hoping to hit. But in the meantime, you get that immediate affirmation of showing up and being that person. And you start to hear that from pretty much anybody who becomes elite at their craft, that it's really, they love doing it. Like if you talk to a lot of pro athletes who are really thriving, they're not really convincing themselves to show up. You ask them and they, like Katrin Davisdottir, who has won the CrossFit Games a couple of times. I saw this interview with her where she said, I can't imagine a more ideal lifestyle than what I have. Like I love getting up and working out every day. That's what if I could design my dream life, this is what I would want.
I have the perfect example for that. The absolute perfect one. I watched this documentary called Choke with Rickson Gracie. And it was about a tournament in Japan. And so it followed the fighters as they lead up to the tournament, and follows Rickson Gracie doing his thing, like preparing like a modern day samurai in Brazil, basically, like doing like insane like fire breathing exercises and all kind, like just really like so focused. And then there's this guy, I want to say his name was like Scott or Todd, and he was a kickboxer, and he's training like normal basically. And, they asked him, well, what's he doing this for? And the reason he was doing this fighting tournament was so he could pay for a bobsled, so he could enter the Olympics as a bobsledder. So for him, it was literally just a means to an end. Like now I can be this bobsledder if I get enough prize winnings. So that was his reason for being there. And then they cut back to like Rickson Gracie, and he goes, jiu-jitsu to me, I would rather have you cut off both my legs than imagine life without jiu-jitsu. And I'm just like, Todd's about to get messed up.
Yeah. We're on different levels here. Yeah.
There's like a really critical difference of like how these two are approaching this craft. Cause you have to approach it like a craftsman if you really want to be excellent, because then you also aren't going to be knocked down. If someone's like, yeah, I don't like your craft, you're like, well, it's okay. I'm not, it's like what I tell people about jokes. Like, I'm not doing it for the laughs.
Right. Yeah. I'm doing it just because I love it.
Yeah, exactly.
It actually reminds me of that story, which is a great example. Jim Collins, who's the business author that wrote Good to Great and Built to Last and Great by Choice, a bunch of other books. I believe it's in the introduction to Good to Great, or maybe it was just an interview that I heard, but he basically says he spent, years, 6 years, 10 years working on this book, doing this research. He's got a whole team. They've invested basically all the money he has into it. And he was asked, like, what would it take to not publish this book? We've got the whole thing written. We put all the work in. and he was on a walk with himself and he was just thinking about the number. And he was like, once I got to 100 million, I realized it has to be out there. Like, basically it's like, you could pay me $50 million. I'm still going to publish this book. Cause it's not even about that. It's not,
right.
It's, I'm doing it for a different reason.
Right. He didn't care about the credit.
Yes.
He was just focused on the message. Right. And that
right.
brings us back to that thing again. Like, you have to, I mean, you don't have to do anything, right? But if you can take your ego out of the equation and still be interested in that result, it means you probably actually really want it.
Right. It's kind of like, I like the question, what are you encoded to do? Like a lot of the time we talk about genes and, maybe having genetic inclinations or biological inclinations or something.
You have a propensity to certain things and a probability.
Right.
Like,
but
I don't think
idea,
I was
like,
built
what are
to be
you
a distance
encoded
runner.
to do? It's like, what is authentic to you? So genuine that, like, it's just you. In a way, that's kind of the quest of a life, is to sort of figure out those things.
It might be impossible because you can't exist in a vacuum, right? So you're always bouncing around your environment, and you're like, ooh, I see that. Ooh, I see that. So we're always looking at the examples around us. I think where the real secret lies is having the presence of mind to take that time for reflection, to ask yourself, is this intrinsically enjoyable? Or am I just doing this because of how I believe others will perceive me?
Right. Like,
and then
what you said before, is it a borrowed goal? Right.
Right.
Is it borrowed or is it intrinsic?
Well, and it's really like, am I doing this because of how I think I will be perceived? Like, it creates this avatar, this allure that I think people will like? Or is it because I really want that thing just because it's fun? And that's why my strategy for fitness now is basically just remove barriers as much as possible. Everything is just removing barriers. So the most popular thing I've done, and also the least effort, by the way, was 5-minute flow, where all I did was I recommend people wake up, wiggle for 5 minutes, and drink a large glass of water. And I said, this is like a really easy domino. It's a no-brainer. Like, you have to have healthy joints. Most people don't do this. And it took me almost no effort whatsoever to put it together. Whereas with Ultimate Athleticism, it was like a multi-year project trying to, like, do all this stuff. And this 5-minute flow concept just took off, and people are, making videos of themselves doing joint circles and waking up and talking about how their back doesn't hurt and about how their day is better. And they're like, oh, I can never do a 5-minute flow. It's always like a 10 or a 30-minute flow now, because once you get going. And I'm just like, man, like, so I mean, and I can't tell you.
It's hilarious. If you had called it 30-minute flow, nobody would have done it.
No one would have even tried. But 5 minutes seems super manageable. And that's why I have on my watch, ready to go all the time, a 5-minute timer, ready to rock. And so people respond well to things that are enjoyable and things that have the fewest amount of barriers possible. There's no excuse not to do a 5-minute flow. If you don't have access to water, you have way bigger problems than joint mobility. So if you can at least start your day on such a positive note like that, better yet, go outside for 5 minutes. I mean, that can really be a huge game changer. And I laugh because I get emails thanking me for that all the time. And I'm like, dude, I used like none of my expertise about fitness whatsoever. It was like a little bit of like behavioral psychology, and like, it's just one of those funny things, and it can really take off and develop a mind of its own. And that was also the secret, was I didn't care about how I would be perceived for that. I was just like so intent on like, okay, because it's frustration, right? Discomfort and frustration is what breeds innovation. And it's like, what is level 0? What can I actually get someone to do? And if someone can do a 5-minute flow for 2 weeks, they'll keep doing it. And it's one of those, it's like so simple, so easy. And if someone can't do that, then you need to like really have a serious re-examination of what you think is important or not.
There's a really important a couple little insights that you brought up that I think tie in well with habit formation and some of the concepts I talk about in the book. Specifically what you said about it needs to be easy. You got to remove barriers. It needs to be enjoyable. It needs to be pleasurable. Fun.
Right.
Well, from a high level, and in the book, I call these the 4 laws of behavior change, but from a high level, you need basically kind of 4 things for a habit to stick. You want it to be obvious. So in other words, it needs to be available or visible or easy to access, easy to see, get your attention. You want it to be attractive. So it's like appealing to you, to feels like motivating, or you're at least interested to do it. And then it needs to be easy, which is exactly what you're mentioning here. Convenience drives so many of our habits. The more convenient, frictionless, automatic, simple behaviors are, the more likely you are to do them. And then the fourth and final thing is it needs to be satisfying. It has to be pleasurable and enjoyable. And those 4 laws, make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. They're kind of like 4 big levers that you can pull, and you don't even need to use all of them all the time. But if you have 2 or 3 of them in the right position, the habit is way more likely to stick. And certainly convenience and satisfaction, enjoyment are 2 of those big pillars, big pieces that if you get them into place, is way easier for habits to stick.
Yeah, I think it's so important to really pay attention to what moves the needle forward for a person. And I think that what you just said is like a perfect segue into the power of journaling or note taking, because that's a way that you can keep track basically and see like, okay, I'm doing this thing. Am I getting the progress that I want? Am I getting the fulfillment that I'm after? Like what is this really doing for me? And, I think a big part of it too is you have to like release this shame idea of laziness and procrastination, and just instead accept that's how we're all alive right now. Like we're all alive because like so deep in your genetic code is like maximum survival.
Conserving energy and spending it only
Always.
For the highest and best use.
Exactly.
Which is really what, like, procrastination is just you're choosing to conserve energy and not spend it on that thing at that moment.
Well, and the better you get at using leverage so that fewer decisions have a bigger return, the more lazy and procrastinating you appear to be. Right?
Particularly true in an age of such leverage like ours, where the internet provides more leverage and scale than ever before. Technology and automation provides more scale than ever before. Social media platforms, like previously 100 years ago, you would give a lecture to 100 people or 1,000 people, and it would die as soon as you uttered the last word. Now you can give a lecture to your camera and put it on YouTube, and it can continue to be watched by millions, and next year and next 10 years and so on. So leverage is all around us now. Technology is upgrading and expanding our natural abilities. But to take it back to your point about journaling and writing, there are sort of different cadences, and you'll be well versed in this based on your experience with lifting and training. There are different cadences with which you can measure things. And so sometimes, the measurement, you want it to not be too quick because then you're responding to noise. But you also don't want it to be too slow, because if the measurement is too slow, you lack signals of progress. And people need signals of progress to feel motivated to continue to stick with a habit. So this is why, for example, the scale might not change for a few days or a few weeks, or the weight on the bar might not go up for a few workouts or a few weeks. But it's nice to be able to say, track your workout, even if it's something simple like a habit tracker where you just put an X on the day that you go to the gym, because that gives you a little bit faster cadence of measurement where you can see, hey, I showed up today. I did the right thing. I got to the gym. I reinforced the person I want to be. And even if the weight on the bar hasn't moved yet, or the weight on the scale hasn't gone down yet, I'm still doing the right thing, and I have a signal of progress. And so that kind of immediate feedback is helpful to pair with the journaling and reflection and review and meditation, and just generally thinking about your long-term goals, maybe every week or every month or once a year or whatever it is.
Well, it's like you have process journaling and outcome journaling, basically. Like the process journaling is like, did I go to the gym today? Check. Yes, I did. How many pounds did I lift? Okay, I lifted this many pounds. That sucks, but we shouldn't be measuring how many pounds I lift on a day-by-day basis. That should be measured on maybe like a monthly or even quarterly basis, depending on how much importance you put into the amount of pounds that you can lift. Personally, I don't give a damn how many pounds I can lift anymore, because every time I try to pick something up that I think is reasonable, I can pick it up. And that's like pretty good, you know? But I do find that process journaling can be really good too. I mean, that has to be like the precursor, I think. And people would do well to not be so hard on themselves when it comes to like, oh, I forgot to do this thing, because, you know, just take measures so that you remember it. And the easiest way to do that is with a checklist. And the favorite example I have of that was in Michigan, when you had like hundreds of thousands of people dying just because they were not following the safety protocols for putting in an IV. I mean, a simple thing. People were just like not washing their hands. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, so like tons of people are dying just because you're not following the protocol.
Yeah.
So there's no
For anyone listening who isn't familiar with that, there's like a 5-step procedure that surgeons do when they insert a central line. And what they found was that some of these steps were just getting skipped, like washing your hands, for example, the first step. Mostly just because doctors and nurses were super busy and running around, and they just didn't remember to do all 5 steps all the time. And so as soon as they implemented a checklist and had the nurses make sure every doctor did each step every time, all of a sudden I think it was like, deaths dropped by like 9,000 the next year or something. It was crazy.
It was like down to zero. Like all of the deaths from complications, it went down to zero. Like all the people survived instead. So people just didn't get that infection anymore. And it happened concurrently with one extra thing that you touched on briefly, which was that now the nurses were checking in. And a lot of that was changing the culture surrounding that too.
If a nurse couldn't question a doctor before or hold them accountable, then
the
all of a sudden
ego
you have a problem.
rearing its ugly head and making you pay the price, right?
Right.
That's a really interesting story to me, because what's more important for a surgeon than washing their freaking hands?
There are all kinds of examples of that, though. Like if you just think about the amount of knowledge, the amount of best practices that are out there in the world, they all, they're the best practice for every domain exists somewhere, but it's often not widely distributed. It is not uniformly used across the industry. It's not like 98% of people are using the best practice and 2% of people are like toying with new ideas. It's like 1 or 2% are using the best practice and everybody else is using some other version that gets them only a portion of the results. It's an interesting problem, that idea of like disseminating the best ideas rather than looking for new ones. And there's a lot of examples of that. I think honestly, to a certain degree, this is why just focusing on building basic habits can account for so much. You don't really need new solutions. You just need to implement the solutions we already know. And so it's less about like intensity in the sense of doing more, or innovation in the sense of doing better, and more about volume and just showing up and doing what we already know works and being consistent about it. And so it's yet another reason that I think habits occupy such an important space in our lives.
Well, there's no like extra honor gained actually from doing it the hard way, even though the reality is like our society likes someone whose story dips down before it goes up quite a lot. So there's this like sense of like martyrdom. It's kind of the same thing with like the busyness. Like, oh, I suffered for this. Oh, I'm just so busy. Oh my God, I'm so busy. And like everybody's so busy. And it's like, what are you busy with? Like people 500 years ago on a feudal state were busy. Like we're not busy. The poop goes away. You flush, it goes away. Like you type on your thing and then the person gets it instantaneously. Like there's no way you're busy with things that are necessary all day long. And all it does is remind me of that saying. If you don't have time to meditate for 10 minutes, then you need an hour. It's like, it is interesting how basically we get tricked into giving our attention to things that don't actually serve us. And we're searching for this like magic thing, but the magic is already there. The magic is that you can decide any moment what attitude you want to have, and you can decide any moment what action you want to take. And people already know. People already know that it's good to take a walk every day. People already know that it's good to have sunshine every day. People already know that it's important to let your spouse or partner know that you love them and care about them And we all know that a 5-minute shoulder rub goes a ridiculously long way. Right. Mm-hmm. So like there are all these like low hanging fruit there that are just like ripe and easy for the taking that people just ignore because they don't think it'll have that big of an effect. And so the people who say no to doing a 5-minute movement session and do 0 instead are kind of falsely led to believe that it's just not enough to do only 5 minutes, but actually your whole life is made up of 1-minute blocks and 5-minute blocks and 20-minute, like everything is like that. So you have to get yourself into that frame of mind where you're able to just pick up the low-hanging fruit and you don't necessarily try to look for those magic bullets. And, you know, because we have the law of least action, it's hard to do because we want more for less. And every marketing thing over the history of human communication is, we're going to give you more for less, right? Everything.
There's a very big difference, a very wide gap between everybody knows this and everybody does this. And so many of the ideas that we look over are, oh, well, everybody already knows about that. That's obvious, right? That's common sense.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that everybody
obvious.
is doing it, right? Like that, just because it's obvious doesn't mean that people are taking action on it.
Well, what does obvious mean? That's one of my favorite things to ask people right now is to define obvious.
I think usually we define it, or when people give a response like that, and they say, oh, well, that's obvious. What they mean is I've learned about it previously. And
right.
What's
it's clearly apparent to them.
Yes. And what's interesting is that there are kind of multiple things to take away from that. One is, well, okay, fine, you learned about it, but are you using it? You've got plenty of knowledge that's not being applied. So there's a gap.
Right.
There. Then the second thing is often they use that as a criticism for ideas. They say, oh, well, that idea is obvious.
They're using it
already knows that.
as like a synonym for too simple almost.
Yes. But what's funny is that at some point, that was a new idea to them. They learned it for the first time. And that is true for anybody else who has not come in contact with that idea or strategy yet. And right. So to say that something is obvious really is just saying that for my particular learning curve or for my particular experiences through life, I've already encountered this. And so you're devaluing it, but it actually doesn't mean anything about the inherent value of the idea.
All you're saying is you already know.
Yeah.
All you're saying is I already know that.
Right.
And if it's something that you say is obvious, but you don't act on it, then it means you know it, but you don't understand it.
You certainly don't apply it. You don't understand how to use it, even if you understand how it works or you believe you do.
Right. Like people know that like walking for 10 minutes is good, but if you don't practice that, it means you don't actually think it's important. Because if you thought it was really important, you would do it.
Right. Your actions are your real priorities. And
show me, don't
sometimes
tell me. Show me, don't tell me. Basically,
yes,
again.
Show me, don't tell me. Sometimes that people think that sounds harsh, like, oh, that's such a strict way to live. But I don't know any other honest way to put it. Like that's how it is. If you don't, it doesn't mean that you don't care about everything that you don't do. It just means that you care about other things more. It is not a priority.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot easier to know something than it is to practice it.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. There are also just a lot of lessons that come with practicing things that are very hard to distill or tell. It's there's certain knowledge that can only be learned by doing. Certainly physical skills are like that. You can describe all you want how to set your feet and place and like what direction your knees should go and how to, feel the weight on the balls of your toes or back in your heels or whatever. But like ultimately you kind of have to do the movement to learn the skill of doing it.
Well, and that's the shortcoming of academia is there's no practical side of things. So it's very easy to like talk about these concepts, and we're talking about concepts and concepts and concepts. But when you don't have skin in the game, it's kind of meaningless. Right. Like we can tell stories about all these different writers, all these different entrepreneurs, all these different athletes over the history of time, but we're not necessarily going to be able to put that into practice And if we're just talking about it, it actually doesn't do us all that much good.
It's
just entertainment, actually.
I worry about academia, or sorry, not academia, social media and blogging becoming kind of like a new form of academia in that sense, a new like kind of ivory tower where everybody has an opinion, but nobody has a ton of skin in the game. Everybody has an opinion, but they're not, out there like doing the actual work.
Totally.
Sometimes the writing is the work, maybe for like a journalist or if you're writing a book or something. But even then, the lesson that you're often learning is a little bit different than what you think you might be learning. If somebody hosts a conference on how to make money in real estate, remind yourself that they are making their money by hosting a conference. If somebody creates an online course about how to, like write books, remind yourself that they're making money by selling an online course. Right. So learn not just from what people say, but also from what they do. There's a lot of, the thing that you're really learning is whatever the craft you are doing. You may also secondarily learn the thing you are teaching or the thing you're writing about, but be clear about where the real lesson is there.
Well, and when we're talking about putting together a book or something, we're really putting together like a vessel of ideas, and as we discussed,
with which to share the concepts.
It's a tool. And as we said before, like what you're trying to do is to be a catalyst for action. Like that's the ultimate form of writing to me, is if you're a catalyst for action in the real world. If you can have two-dimensional things, I mean, it's three-dimensional, but just like, the ink on a page is really tiny. Like we don't have to get that specific. Although I'm really like a nerd about stuff like that.
You're right, though. Sparking someone to move, sparking an action is the ultimate test of how valuable an idea is. We can debate what are your credentials. Do you have a PhD? Where do you work? How, what badges and labels of status and honor have been ascribed to you? Is it a bestseller? Whatever. But the ultimate judge is it useful in daily life? Do people read this and do they make a change? And if did they
take an action?
Yes. If people take action on it, then that is the ultimate test of whether the idea is true or not. Does it hold up in the real world?
Well, and I'm sure exactly how effective your emails are in terms of selling books. And if you don't, I'd be really shocked. So the fact that you know exactly how effective your writing is when it comes to selling product, that's quantifiable. That's like where the real communication happens. And that's what I think is so funny about academia, is the writing is absolute crap and extra confusing for no reason, and usually doesn't inspire any action. So like if you're trying to study like good writing, sales copy, like who's moving the most product, they're delivering their message in a way that the customer is hearing and taking an action on.
Right.
And
looking at copywriters or advertisers is often much more valuable if you want to drive people to move. It's really kind of a shame that academia has so much jargon involved, because a lot of our brightest minds the ideas are kind of locked behind this weird,
firewall
language. Yeah. It's like they're impossible to decipher, and half the time you can't even access them because they're on restricted, gated sites. So anyway,
what's the point? What's the benefit of a tool? The benefit of a tool is in its usefulness, and language is a tool. So if you take language from what is a simple tool to help convey communication both ways faster and more easily, it's so we don't have to like grunt and point and like like that's like the ultimate other end of the spectrum. So if you take something that was designed to make communication more precise and quicker, and you do exactly the opposite, so you can be in some sort of like, it's kind of like an academic circle jerk where everybody's like doing all these like flowery language, but that's just proof that they're like writing for how they will appear instead of writing for what the result is going to be.
It's just status signals within their tribe, and unfortunately anybody outside of the tribe suffers because we're not playing the same game. But it's mostly it's like, well, if I wrote in clear, easy to understand language, I wouldn't be taken seriously by my peers or whatever.
Which is horrible that's a horrible stigma. Like that's
Sure.
what's
It's
worse
a
than
loss
that.
for us all, really. It's kind of a shame. And also, if you read academic papers from, I don't know, 75 to 100 years ago, early 1900s, they don't read the same way. They're much more normally written. They're way easier to digest. So I don't know why at some point over the last 75 to 100 years, we really developed this unfortunate level of jargon, and that has hindered, I think, the spread of a lot of good ideas.
Yeah, the best thing a writer can do is get the words out of the way of the story as much as possible.
You don't even, Maya Angelou has that great quote where she's like, when I hand a manuscript to my editor, I want him to be 30 minutes in before he realizes that reading is what he's doing. Right. It's like, you're not even thinking about the words. You're just like, you're so into it that the words aren't even in the way. They're just,
like, don't interfere. Don't interfere with that complexity and confusion. And, since we're talking directly about how much action we can inspire, because I can tell that's also what you want. And that's super evident from the way that you write, is you're always thinking, okay, so I'm going to give you this chunk, this block of information. Here's what you can do with it. Like, here's something that you can really do with it. And so what I want to ask you is, where is that good balance? And I'm sure it's different for everybody, as most things are, between using additional tools to help guide your behavior, like journaling, like various prompts, and what is like the unnecessary complexity? Because I always think of it from a standpoint of, how can I reduce as much as possible? It's like we were talking about intellectual leverage. Less explains more. If I can have one journal prompt instead of 3, and it's just as effective, then I would rather do the 1. And the only reason you would have 3 is so you can increase your specificity or precision, right? So that's the only reason to add complexity, is if you gain specificity or precision. So does that make sense? Like, where do you strike that balance? Because that's something that
as much
I've
as
noticed
possible,
people struggle with.
As much as possible, I want compression. I want to compress it down to what is the most useful. Like, in one sense, in one example, the first draft of Atomic Habits was 720 pages. The finished version is about 250, right? And what's crazy is that I cut one chapter, and then I had another thing that was kind of like half-baked, another like half chapter that got cut. But aside from those two, basically those 720 pages just became the 250 by getting compressed. I just reduced the potency of every idea, reduced the length of every idea while retaining the potency. I tried let me deliver the most value in the most compressed form possible. And there are a lot of books, if we're being honest, that are 200, 300 pages that should be a 4,000 word blog post. And I really did not want to fall into that struggle or that pitfall. I wanted to be able to provide something that I felt like, no, it's worth reading every chapter and it's worth reading every word because it's already been compressed. So in that sense, it's like, kind of, how can I provide the most wisdom per word in a 250 page package? Right. Yeah. So I think that general idea, though, of compression it has helped me a lot for writing, but it also can be used for a lot of different habits. There's you may be familiar with Josh Waitzkin, who wrote The Art of Learning and does like martial arts and stuff. So he had one example in The Art of Learning that I thought was good, where he talked about his like pre-game ritual, basically his routine that he did, like a haka match. And yes, right, the haka.
I have some people do that for their fitness. It's pretty silly.
He started, and his routine was initially like, I don't know, I can't remember exactly, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that. This whole stretching routine and mental, warm up and all this stuff. And then eventually he just continued to compress it. He would like take little bits out and he would tweak little bits so that it got shorter, and it was 12 minutes and then 10 minutes and then 7 minutes. And eventually he got it all the way down to where it was 30 seconds. And it would do the same thing that the 15-minute warm-up did, which is it would like flip a switch in his head where it said, hey, it's game time now. And it really came in handy. He was at this one tournament, I believe it was in China, and they told him the wrong time for his match. And so he was taking a nap on the bench, and they ran over and tapped him like, hey, we're on the mat right now. And he was able to do his routine in 30 seconds and boom, he was ready to go. And so that kind of compression with pretty much any habit, you can't do it infinitely. Like, here's an example that I think clarifies. So
it's like Euclid's habit reduction.
Yes, kind of, right? So it's like
cut it in half, cut it in half, cut it in half, cut it in half.
I love Indian food. So like, let's say that you had a friend who was making this Indian dish and you're like, oh, I hadn't tried that before. Like, I'd love to see if I would like it or not. You don't need to eat the entire dish to decide if you like it or not. You could just have a spoonful, right? So we've been able to reduce the
sampling,
size, right? The sampling without reducing the potency. You can try the whole thing. But let's say that meal has like rice in it, for example. Well, you can't only eat 1 grain of rice. That doesn't tell you what the meal is like. You've now lost the experience of all the ingredients, right? And
you
so
need to experience the synergy of the ingredients, right?
Right. There is some limit to the compression or to the reducing of things. But provided that you have the overall experience baked in there, I think as much as possible, compression is a really valuable thing to pursue.
Yeah. If you have reduction set as your goal for knowledge acquisition, that alone, that one small frame of mind will make you start thinking of, how do I make this concept smaller so I can keep it easier? Like, show me, don't tell me is like, it speaks volumes in a very small amount.
Right.
The idea
this is one thing that's great about Twitter. Forces you to compress.
I'm sure you've, one of my favorite books is Beautiful Constraint. Have you read that one?
No.
Oh, it's pretty cool. I might even have an extra one I could send you if you want.
Yeah, I got to check it out. Beautiful Constraint.
I'll add it to the pile.
Yeah. Thank you.
Your office.
That's one I will read though. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, but basically like it has a lot of mind mapping. So it shows how things are interrelated, which I like. And then the whole concept is how you have to like reduce the possibilities to make things fun, interesting, and help you embrace your creativity. And it's like part of the reason that people like watching a sport is that they're like a clear set of rules.
Right.
Like if you just had like two dudes like go out onto a court and then there's like a ball in the center and they were like, go, and nobody knew what to do. There's like no objective. Like it would be total chaos, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So the idea is you have to like reduce the amount of options to expand your creativity. And with my coaching group, I've used this concept a lot because, you know, I want to teach them how to think and not just how to move. So for 1 month, the only piece of equipment that we used in this coaching group I have was a wooden dowel. So everything was built around how you can create the amount of force to elicit a training effect using just this wooden dowel. And then another month I showed them how to build a big wooden cube, like a 20-pound wooden cube. And it's really easy. Like you can do it with just like one saw, like cut them all together and glue them together. You don't have to make it super fancy or anything like that. But basically giving them a scenario and a framework, but then also giving them that ability to explore the space because they're so constrained. So you can constrain it based on the equipment used. You can constrain your like turbulence of movement by holding a cup of water. Like one of the things that I like having people do is see how quickly they can get up and down off the floor and see how quickly they can go 10 feet forward, 10 feet backward, left and right without spilling the water. Because you're adding this different element of constraint that forces them to be more innovative and creative. So it gives you like this really nice experience where you have skin in the game, where you can feel that effect.
There's a great example I've written about before. I have an article on it. It's called futsal. So it's like a version of soccer. Yeah, that's played in
indoor. Smaller,
it's tighter, court. Smaller field, fewer players. But what they found out was that a lot of the great Brazilian soccer players, they started by playing futsal. And partially because of the smaller space, because of the constraint, they were forced to develop amazing ball skills. How do I move and get out of jams and make a move on another player in a very tight space? And that ended up, once they became 18 and 20 and 25 years old, now they're out on a larger field, but they've got these incredible skills from the small space that they can like make plays and then, utilize the space available to them. So in a lot of ways, constraints can actually be a catalyst for growth if they're well chosen and well organized.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like that saying, aim small, miss small.
Yeah, right.
And so I mean, there are so many good examples of how you can, and training is really about that, is like that super compensation you get from stress. So that, stress and stimulus are synonyms, and we want to try to have like the optimal amount, right? It's like Goldilocks amount of like stress and stimulus. And I think one of the best measures of the effectiveness of a training program is how big of an amplitude someone can tolerate. So you basically are a shock absorber. Like your interaction with the world, if you're moving, should be primarily your hands and feet, right? It shouldn't be too much like butt, because then you're just getting your ass kicked in some way. Now we obviously sit on our butts quite a lot. Yeah, right, exactly. Because your hands and feet are the best shock absorbers. I mean, if you look at the design of the human foot, it is very nicely set up to absorb and return as much elastic energy as possible. So
and even your entire lower chain, right? I mean, you got all those joints there. Basically, your leg is a big shock absorber.
The whole thing is a shock absorber. Your opposite arm and your head, like everything is this like coiling spring that deforms and then expands back out.
Interesting to think about the human body as like a spring that's being like kind of moving strangely across the landscape like that, right? But that's how we move. It's like this transfer of energy in this compression and uncompression.
That's it. And it's usually the contact point is very localized, which is why if you have weak feet, you're in real trouble. Because there's nothing you can do up top to solve that problem at the foundation.
Right. At some point, everything has to go through the foot.
It all starts by going through the foot. So if you have that first contact point is garbage, you're gonna have tons of extra problems. So starting people off with the hands and feet, because those are your main ways that you interact with your environment.
Right.
Like, so if you have the physical ability to get yourself around quickly and use your hands and feet as a shock absorber, you're going to feel like you're pretty much like engaging with life. But if you're mostly just like getting bounced around and you're not doing a good job absorbing that shock, it's just going to create this damage over time. So you have to be really good at, I guess the word is adaptability. That's really the synonym that I have for the coaching that I do. Like, we want to obviously be able to make better decisions. We want to perform at a higher level, but really the most important thing is adaptability. Like, can you survive in this scenario? Right. Can you survive in this scenario? Like, I wouldn't really want to, I mean, this is just showing what my preferences are, obviously. Like, I would never want to date a woman who would need to have like a 5-star hotel every night just to be comfortable and satisfied. I would want someone who's able to like wrestle around on the floor and sleep in a tent for a week and not like crumble psychologically. So when you talk about coaching, I think that is like the chief thing, is like your adaptability. So like, how well can you interact with your environment? How precisely, how quickly, how effectively can you interact in your environment, in any environment?
I have a quote near the end of Atomic Habits that's like that. It's actually from the Tao Te Ching from Lao Tzu. But it essentially says, when a tree dies, the branches are brittle and hard. When it is alive, it is supple and pliant. And the way of life, the way of living, is to be flexible. And the way of the dead is to be brittle and rigid. And so, yeah, for anything to be alive, for any habit to live, for any life to continue to evolve, you have to be flexible. You have to be adaptable. So yeah, I think it's a crucial element that you bring up.
If I had to
Thanks,
pick
man.
one
It's
word,
been, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
springiness.
Springy. That's good too.
Springiness.
Yeah.
That if you want to see a bunch of people who are aging gracefully, look for people who are still springy. And if you want to see people who are aging horribly, they're losing that springiness. It sounds like you got to run.
Yeah, I do. But I appreciate the opportunity. Honestly, I feel like I learned just as much chatting with you as hopefully I was able to share as well. So it was a nice discussion. Thanks for having me on.
Well, you know what? I know you have a busy schedule, but if you have time, let's meet up again, because I would love to ask you more questions about habits and stay in touch with you, because I'm really happy with everything you're doing, and I'm glad everything's worked out so well.
Oh, thanks, man. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for your help along the way, and looking forward to chatting again next time.
All right, cool. Thanks, man. Take care.
Cool. See you, Max.
All right, everybody. Hope you guys learned something. If you want to stay in touch with me or join our coaching program, the M3 Academy, I recommend you visit maxshank.com, and you can find everything you need there. Have a great day. Make it a good one.